Welcome everybody to lesson 2 of the Preces Latin Toolkit. Today we're going to talk a bit more about nouns, particularly the genitive and vocative cases. We'll talk about pronouns and one more thing about adjectives. So let's get into it. So last time, remember, we talked about in English the fact that word order is what determines the subject and the object of a sentence. And if you don't know what those terms mean, go back to lesson 1. But in Latin, it's the word ending which determines the subject and the object. So the case of the noun determines what function that noun has in a sentence. So the subject, we use the nominative case. For the direct object, we use the accusative case, and that's often, but not always, used with prepositions like ad, which means to, as in ad trinitatem. The dative case is for the indirect object, and the indirect object is what receives the direct object. And it's translated often with English prepositions like to or for, but in Latin, the dative case doesn't ever take a preposition. The ablative case, however, is often used with prepositions. And the ablative case is used to signify, the agents or means or materials by which an action is done. Answers the question how. And then adjectives have to agree with the noun that they modify in case, number, and gender. So that was all last time. So let's do this time. Now remember, Latin is logical, so that means we can explain it, and so anyone can learn Latin. Now this is a rather hideous slide. This is just to show you all the declensions, the 5 declensions, which are groups of patterns of endings for all the various nouns in Latin. And I put down this side of the slide some examples of nouns from the Preces which fall into each of the different categories. I'm just going to put my pointer on to be like a laser pointer, which I enjoy. So the first declension are nouns like Maria, Papa, Misericordia. Second declension are things like Deus, Filius, Dominus. Third declension, Trinitas, Deitas, Unitas, etc. Fourth declension, Spiritus, not too many fourth declension nouns, and there's no fifth declension nouns used in the Preces. Now you don't have to learn this table. When we go through the Preces from go to woe in the second set of videos, we're going to just look up tables. We're certainly not going to be using my poor memory, which can't remember all these things, but that's just to show you so you sort of have it like in context where we're going. But everything can be looked up, so there's no need for our purposes to memorize it. And that's just a list of every single noun in the Preces. We won't dally there. Let's go straight to the Preces and let's look at the line Christe Filii Vivi Miserere Nobis, which is translated as Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on us. Now Christe and Filii are in what we call the vocative case, and Dei is in the genitive case. So let's talk about those. So the vocative case. Et tu, Brute. According to Shakespeare, this is what Julius Caesar, represented here, said to his long-term friend Marcus Brutus, just when Brutus was about to stab him. Remember, Marcus Brutus was one of the leading conspirators in the plot to assassinate Julius Caesar. His name is Brutus, and yet Shakespeare puts the line as et tu, which means and you, Brute, which means Brutus, but you can see it's in what we call down here the vocative case. So it's the case of addressing someone. So when you address someone, you put it into the vocative case. Now, happily in Latin, most of the time, the noun in the vocative case is exactly the same as the nominative case, so not anything else to learn. The exception is nouns from the second declension which are masculine. And in those nouns, and Christus is one of them, what you do, you get the stem of the noun, which is just the constant bit of the word, so in this case, Christ, and you take off the US from the nominative and then you stick an E on, and then that becomes the vocative case, right? How about Filius, which is also in the vocative case? Filius means son, and it's, again, every language has exceptions, so Filius is one of those exceptions. It is a second declension masculine noun, and normally that would mean that you would chop off the US, leaving with fili, and then it would be filiae. but that's a little bit hard to say, so it's just become fili in most usages. So fili is the vocative of filius, right? So in Christe fili Dei vivi, miserere nobis, Christe and fili are in the vocative case. All right, let's look at Dei, D-E-I, which means of God. The noun is Deus, again, a second declension masculine noun, meaning God. Now, the genitive case, I always think of it as meaning possession, which it does, but it can also be used in other ways, and those other ways are to show the origin of something or the cause of something. In this case, fili Dei vivi, it's been used to show possession. So it's been used to show that Christ is God's son, okay? So let's have a look at the declension of Deus. Again, Deus is actually one of those slightly unusual, atypical second declension nouns. Its vocative is not Dei, it's Deus usually. Okay, that's how you would usually see it. Same as the nominative, right? But we're concerned here with the genitive. I don't know why the dative's underlined there, so sorry about that. But we're interested in the genitive, D-E-I, Dei. So Christe fili Dei vivi. So Christ, son of God. Let's keep going, because now we've got to look at, we're not going to worry too much about miserere nobis, we're just going to note that that means have mercy on us. But let's have a look at vivi. What's vivi? It's an adjective, and it means living. So we know it must apply to one of the nouns in the sentence. So it must apply either to Christe, fili, or Dei. They're all nouns, right? So because word order is flexible in Latin, you can't automatically assume that just because it's next to a noun, it applies to that noun. So let's look at vivi, and let's look at its chart. We know that Christe, fili, and Dei are all masculine nouns, so we don't need to worry about all of this. We'll just look at this top section here. And we look down and we can see that vivi is the genitive form of vivus. So it must be describing a noun in the genitive case, right? And the only noun in the genitive case here is Dei. So this must be describing God, okay? Not Christe and not fili, okay? So this sentence is Christ, son of the living God. It is not Christ, the living Son of God, or living Christ, Son of God. It's Christ, Son of the living God. So I hope that makes sense. A little bit more on the genitive. I mentioned it's not just possession that it shows. It can show some other things. Two important uses are what's called the partitive and the objective. So the partitive, what if I say that George is one of the Beatles, right? George Harrison. That does not mean the same thing as George is the Beatles one. So one of the Beatles, that's using the partitive case of the genitive. You can't tell in English, but if I put it in Latin, Beatles would be in the genitive, okay? Or another example might be a group of students. Students would be in the genitive. And it's not actually possessive. And you can tell that, but if you turn the sentence around and put an apostrophe, as we would in English for the possession, it doesn't quite make sense anymore. Okay, the students group isn't really the same as a group of students. And then the objective use, think about the statement, I hate koalas. Koalas is the object of that statement. I am the subject. What about then if I say I have a hatred of koalas? Okay, so hatred of koalas is acting a bit like an object, okay, because I have it, right? So that's the objective use of the genitive. And in Latin, koalas would be in the genitive there. And again, you can use the same trick. That's not the same as I have the koala's hatred, is it? So I'm just mentioning that. You won't see too many uses of the genitive like that in the Preces, but just for completion's sake. Now it's time for us to move on to pronouns. Pronouns are things which stand in place of a noun. Okay. So the usual ones that we think of are personal pronouns like I, me, mine. And pronouns therefore have person, or certainly personal pronouns do. Most pronouns do. They have person, so they can be the first, second, or third. So the first person means I or me, okay? I, me, we, right? The second person is you singular, you plural in English. In Old English, You is actually the plural, and thou and thee are the singular in Old English, but that distinction's disappeared in modern English. And then the third person is he, she, it, or they, or them. And then pronouns also can have number, which basically means either single or plural. And then they have case. In English, we see this a little bit, say, I hit the ball. I am the subject, it's I, but we don't say me hit the ball. Okay, we use me as the object. So Paul hits me. When I'm the object, I use the personal pronoun me, right? So you do see that we have a little bit of case in English. It's survived in the pronouns. But in Latin, you have nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, ablative, and vocative. And then there's all sorts of types. Let's just run through them. The two most important ones for our purpose that we're really going to see in the Preces are the personal and the possessive. The personal is just things like I, you, he, she, it, etc. And then the possessive is my, your, his, hers, its, our, yours, and theirs, right? There's also reflexive pronouns. The reflexive pronoun is myself, yourself, himself, and so forth. The demonstrative pronoun is this or that. And relative and interrogative pronouns, who, whom, which, for each. So a relative pronoun, well, let's do interrogative first. I found that easier to understand. An interrogative pronoun is when I say, who hit the ball? Or who broke this window? And then the relative pronoun would be, Paul is the person who broke this window. That's the relative use of the pronoun. And then lastly, there's the indefinite pronoun, which is someone or something. And let's have a look now at personal and possessive pronouns. So here we go. Here's the first and second personal pronouns in the singular versions. So for the first person, I, of me, to or for me in the dative, me in the accusative, and by, with, from, in, on me in the ablative. So the Latin words are ego, me, mihi, sometimes pronounced mihi, me or me. And then for the second person, which is you, it's tu, tui, tibi, te, and te. And then the plurals, we're not going to see too many of the second person plurals, but we're certainly going to see the first person plural, we or us. Okay, so that's nos is we, nostrum, or sometimes nostri, is of us in the genitive. Nobis is to, for, or us. Nos, again, same as the nominative. Accusative in this case is the same as the nominative, which is just nos. And then nobis is the ablative. So we're going to see a fair bit of nos and nobis. Here's a few examples. Gratias tibi means thanks to you from the beginning of the Preces. Okay, that's tibi is the dative case. Then ora pro nobis is the ablative case. Nobis, we can see down here, can be dative or ablative, but we know because it's got a pronoun. Remember, the dative doesn't take a pronoun. So ora pro nobis is actually ablative. And then sicut tu pater in me et ego in te, that means even as you, Father, are in me and I am in you. Again, in this sentence, the verb is and are is implied. Okay, pater is in the nominative, tu is in the nominative. So, and sicut means even, so, or as, even as you, Father, are in me, or me in the Latin. So we can see that me is accusative, right? And I, ego, are in you, te, and we can see that te again is also accusative. Now, a very important thing to note here is that in Latin, the genitive of personal pronouns is never used to show possession. Okay, so this genitive here, mei, tui, or nostrum, nostri, is only going to be used for those other types of use of the genitive, like the objective or the partitive use that we talked about before with George Harrison and the koalas, right? So if we want to use, or we want to show possession using personal pronouns in Latin, we have to use the possessive pronouns. So here is the chart of the possessive pronouns for the first person singular. And again, you can see it gets quite complicated. Let me just turn on the laser printer again, laser pointer rather. Masculine, feminine, or neuter, okay, depending on what the noun is. So if I wanted to say, my God is a masculine noun, so I would use my in the masculine, even though I am a female, right? Or if I wanted to say my Trinity is a female noun, I would use a female a female possessive pronoun, right? Okay, and again, there's also gender, number, case, and it declines, right? So let's look at an example. An example would be et clamor meus, okay? My cry. So clamor is cry, et is and meos is in the same case, nominative, masculine, singular, as clamor is, okay? And dominus illuminatio mea, I'm going to actually skip over that, but it's the same idea. Okay, what about the second person, your? Here's the chart, and again, we'll see many examples in the Preces. Couple of examples here. Et libera nos propter nomen tuum. Okay, so propter nomen, liberate us by way of your name. So nomen, name, is in the accusative, and so tuum is going to be in the accusative singular as well, and matches up with nomen, which is accusative singular. And then let's look at intercede per filius tuus. Okay, filius here is a plural. Okay, this is the Preces and Jose Maria. Intercede for your sons and daughters. Means anyway. Let's not get into that. Intercede for your sons. Plural, and so tuis, let's look at it. Here it is. It's actually an ablative, and that's the plural form tuis, right? So filius is the ablative plural of filios. Here's the chart for the first person plural, and again you can see masculine, feminine, neuter, single, and plural. So let's have a look. Sancti Angeli Custodes Nostri. This is actually a vocative plural, and so we need to have a look for a vocative plural. Here it is, nostri. Okay, ad sanctum Joseph Mariam conditorum nostrum. Sanctum Joseph Mariam is actually an accusative. Remember, it's after the ad, and things after an ad are often in the accusative, and he's a singular. So let's look, and he's a male, so let's look at the accusative, singular, it's nostrum. So it all matches up, and we could go through it. Papa Nostro Francisco, this is in an ablative, and ablative singular is nostro, and then benefactoribus is an ablative plural. So we go down here, and we can see that an ablative plural is nostris, right? So it all kind of matches up. Now I want to talk about substantives. We're nearly done. Substantive is just a fancy word for an adjective when it acts as a noun. And one example is the meek shall inherit the earth. If you think about the word meek, that's actually an adjective, you know, the meek person, the meek dog, the meek whatever. But here it's acting like a noun. The meek shall inherit the earth. Another great example, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Classic Western film. It's a great film. If you haven't seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, stop this video right now and go and watch it. It's amazing. It's a great film. I think it is about 3 hours long. It's really very long, but it's worth every second. So here we are. The good, bad, and ugly, they're all adjectives, but they're referring, you know, in this case to each of these three characters, the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's the substantive use of adjectives. And in Latin, those adjectives will take gender, case, and number of the implied noun. And there's a few examples in the Preces. So here we go. Here's an example. Dominus iudex noster, dominus legifer noster, dominus rex noster, ipse salvabit nos. Iudex and rex are nouns, right? And they're in the nominative case. This means dominus, the Lord, in the nominative case. Iudex in the nominative case. Noster, our. in the nominative case. This means the Lord is our judge. The Lord is our king. Rex means king. Legifer, however, is actually an adjective, right? Let me just get this all up. So Rex and Eudex are third declension masculine nouns, but legifer here is an adjective, and it means law-giving, right? But if we look here, let's go up to the masculine of legifer here, we can see legifer is the nominative singular, right? So it's acting like a subject. And so it's saying the Lord is our lawgiver, right? Does that make sense? Exactly like the good, the bad, and the ugly. Except in this case, they're using lawgiver rather than good, bad, or ugly, or meek, okay? So now another thing that you can notice with this is what we call the predicate nominative, right? So we're used to something like the man hits the ball, man is the subject, hits is the verb, and ball is the object, right? Because it's been hit, the direct object. But when the verb is, okay, there's no object because that is functioning a bit like an equal sign, right? It's sort of saying that these two things are equal. And so you still have a subject, but you don't call the thing on the other side of the verb or that the verb's referring to an object. You call it a predicate nominative. And it is in the nominative case. So look up here. This means, again, the verb's implied. The Lord is our judge, right? Eudex and the Lord is our king, Rex, are both in the nominative case. They're not in any of these other cases. They're certainly not in the accusative case. We don't say Dominus regem noster. Okay? We don't say the Lord is our regem. The Lord is our king in the nominative because of that verb is. And we'll see that a few times. Okay, yes, we talked about that. All right, so that's the end of this lesson. Bit of a recap. Get that laser pointer out of the way. Looks like a little, skin lesion or something, like a pimple or something. Today we talked about nouns and their cases, and we covered the genitive, which is particularly used for possession, although there are other uses as well. And we talked about the vocative, which is when we directly address someone. And it's the same form as the nominative, except for most second declension masculine nouns. We talked about pronouns, and they have person, case, number, gender. And we talked about personal and possessive pronouns. And we noted that in Latin, when you want to show possession using a pronoun, you don't use the genitive case of the personal, you use the special possessive pronoun. Genitive cases of the personal pronoun only used for the other uses of the genitive, the partitive and objective uses, for example. Then we had a word about substantive adjectives like the good, the bad, and the ugly, or the meek will inherit the earth, when adjectives function as a noun. And we had a little bit of a talk about the predicate nominative when a noun is, or when two nouns are sort of kind of linked together by a verb like is, which functions like an equal sign. So you don't really have an object. You don't actually have something receiving an action. It's like an equivalent. And so both nouns will be in the nominative case, and we call one the subject and one the predicate nominative. And that's all I've got for today. I hope it was sort of comprehensible. Tune in next time and we'll start on verbs.